China's been far more effective at dragging people out of poverty.
I don't want my kids living under Chinese rule.
China doesn't have masses of homeless people on the streets of its city.
An economist just told Piers Morgan that China has no homeless people, no discontent, and does a better job at taking care of its own than the USA. As someone who was born and raised in China, this can't be further from the truth. This utopia where everybody is happy and there is no people sleeping on the street, it never existed in China. It never will. Welcome to my channel. Before we start this episode, remember to subscribe, otherwise you won't see me again. Let's get into it. This is not the first time that I've heard a Western expert mimicking the CCP's propaganda line and talking up China. They tend to think that the elimination of capitalism is gonna bring them a fairer world for the poor. And whenever they have that argument, they look to China and they think China is a better society to live in, especially if you're poor. This is exactly what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to believe. This is consistent with the facade that they've been trying so hard to put on for its Western audience. That China is this utopia that does exist, that China is as good as you can get if you want an alternative.
And what about China?
Russia.
Okay, this is the elephant in the room we finally have. People have been saying to me for decades, what country is trying your approach? I've had me say that I can't nominate one. Now I can nominate China. And China's been far more effective at dragging people out of poverty.
This is probably one of the most popular myths among, I would say, well-educated Westerners. I've heard this line from a lot of people who don't necessarily even agree with CCP on many occasions. They would say that, okay, at the very least, we acknowledge that the Chinese Communist Party has been successful at dragging the country out of poverty. And I have a few counter-arguments that I think a lot of people don't remember. Number one, why do you think we were in such great poverty in the first place? It's because the Chinese Communist Party put us there. We would have been a great nation with a greater economy had we had democracy. But the Cultural Revolution, the Great Famine, the Great Leap Forward movements, all these mistakes, very costly mistakes that were made by a dictatorship, essentially, that was what put the country in poverty. And if you're someone who would, sit there and say, so what? They made a mistake. The greatest famine in human history. A lot of people died, but, at least they're acknowledging the mistakes. Okay, well, how well exactly China is doing? Forget about the propaganda videos that you see on TikTok or YouTube for that matter. China's own poverty line is $2 a day. It sits well below what the World Bank says is appropriate for a country at China's income level. I saw an interview with an economist, a Chinese economist, and he brought up a really interesting point. He talked about how the Soviet Union's GDP per capita was roughly 40% of America's at the time, maybe more depending on the measure. And today, China's GDP per capita is only about 15% of the US. So to put it simply, even if you're willing to overlook the horrible mistakes made by the party that cost millions of lives and put the country under poverty in the first place, China has not yet reached the Soviet Union's peak level relative to the US. The fact is, even if you do go to China, if you do visit China, you're only going to see what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to see. What you don't see is, well, poverty.
China doesn't have masses of homeless people on the streets of its city. I've walked through Chinese and American cities, and I tell you which ones I find more comfortable. It's the Chinese, because I don't have to step over a homeless person every 5 meters. Now, that happens in London these days. It certainly happens in San Francisco.
This is such a classic myth. The homelessness myth is what I call it. First of all, there is homelessness. There are people who live in dire conditions. And you do see homeless people, just maybe not on your 20-minute walk down the river in Shanghai, but they do exist. Here's a little insider perspective that you might appreciate. This is a little bit of a paradox, but I think it's a good thing that you see homeless people. The problem with China is they still exist. They're just hidden by the government. How do they hide it? Well, it's a systematic approach, really. And it is not an exaggeration to say that dogs in the West are treated better than they are treated in China as humans. In 2017, there was this notorious low-end population clearance campaign. We're talking about mass forced evictions. The government thugs, they really just brought in the machines and they just eliminated your home, which wasn't a home to begin with. And the dark side of this is, who are they going to tell? There is no media. They have nobody. They're shouting in the void. Their stories are buried by this powerful regime.
It's the one country which is focused upon redistribution, raising the poor up, and extending the services the vast majority of the public achieve. You might not know of John, you probably know of John Kenneth Galbraith. One of his most famous comments was to talk about America being characterised by private affluence and public squalor. And that really is the state of America. China's gone the opposite direction. It wants public affluence as well as private affluence. It showed the combination works. Now, that is completely against the narrative you're giving.
It's so interesting that people in the West always imagine that China is a great country that offers this safety net for the poor, when the actual poor people in China feel the opposite. Let me introduce you to this registration system called Hukou. The way it's set up is that you register your place of birth, and where you were born has a direct link to what kind of health care, what kind of social welfare you and your family would have access to, no matter where you are. So say if you have a countryside hukou, so you were born in a countryside in China, you won't have access to the city level welfare no matter where you are. That means you might be a migrant worker, right? But you were born in the countryside and you go to work at these big cities, you won't have access to those benefits. And don't think this is, a small number of people. Migrant workers are the heart and soul of China's workforce. You won't hear from them because, unfortunately, maybe they're not very resourceful, right? And they live in these factory dorms, construction site squatter camps. You might see them if you go visit and you see them walking on the street, but you will never hear from them. There's only 4 countries that have had or still have this registration system, and they are Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, and Russia. I don't think I need to explain to you why or how bad this is. This is not a feature of a democracy. This is a feature of an authoritarian regime. And the whole purpose of the system is to control.
Actually, Shanghai is an amazing city.
It is, yeah.
I did a documentary on Shanghai.
Yeah.
I mean, it is an incredible place to go.
And I've been to, I lived in a fourth tier city for some time, only 4 million people, quite small by Chinese standards. And I spent about a month or 2 playing tennis with people there, going to have meals at local Chinese restaurants. There's a high quality of life at the average standard
I
of
agree
living.
the people are fantastic,
America has
but that
extremely
government
wealthy
policy is
people
world
and extremely
domination.
poor. And this,
I don't want my kids living under Chinese rule
well,
anywhere
your
in the
kids
world.
can stay
That's
where
what
they are,
want.
but I think a lot of kids in China are enjoying growing in China right now. And conversations I have with ordinary Chinese people, with quite a wide range of lifestyles, they don't have the adversarial attitude toward the government that you have.
I do want to say Shanghai is a very, very different example of what the real China is. There are areas in Shanghai where you would have access to YouTube. These are the areas where, foreign diplomats, they live in these gated areas and there's no internet firewall. But then there's the huge hidden land that is hidden from the media, where people don't even have access to clean water, let alone the internet. To say that Shanghai is advanced and a great place to visit does not mean that's what the rest of China looks like. This is like saying you visited New York and you think that this is what the US looks like. In the West, if you live a little bit out of the way, it's still pretty, it's still pretty clean. But the disparity between the countryside and the city is huge in China. When you don't have freedom of information, when you don't have a real media, your reality is the reality of your own life and proximity to whoever you know. So a lot of people in China, they are not aware of how privileged they are. They think because they live in a condo, everybody in China lives in a condo because that's all they see. That's all they're allowed to see. Even for locals, like for my family members, it is hard unless you have a background growing up in the countryside. You would have very little idea of what your country really looks like.
The Chinese are more likely to replace a displaced worker by reducing the workload of the others, dropping the retirement age and so on.
This is a factual mistake. China is not dropping its retirement age. It's actually raising the retirement age. And many people in China would tell you that they expected this change a few years back. As of January the 1st, 2025, the government began a 15-year phased increase, men from 60 to 63 and women from 50 to 55. And do I need to remind you, there was no vote, there was no democratic discussion. This was simply decided by the party because they want them to work longer so they can reap the reward in the end.
Yeah,
Freedom
and I
of
think China's
speech
been far more
versus
successful than America
communism.
has for the vast majority of its population. Chinese aren't the ones who are demonstrating against immigration laws like America's doing at the moment. There is more discomfort with the political system in America amongst Americans than you'll find amongst the Chinese.
I think it's good that you're able to see dissents. You're able to express your criticism, dissatisfaction of the government, whatever they might be, I really cherish the ability to curse at the political leader of your country and just not worried about being taken away in a mask by secret police. And need I remind you that the immigration rate is extremely low in China. Right now, there's roughly 0.1% of immigrants in mainland China. It is hard to protest against something that barely exists. And I wonder why. Why not a lot of people want to move to China?
I teach these kids at Harvard, okay? Chinese
No wonder they're
nationals, still some of them that get into North American institutions, they do not want to go home. They want to get an American passport, start an American business, enjoy the American dream, bring their parents over. I'm telling you, it's a philosophical discussion we should be having. Do you want to live under Chinese rule or U.S. policies of freedom of speech and democracy?
I always thought that living under an authoritarian regime is like rolling a dice. You don't know. All of a sudden, maybe you said something that's very offensive in the eyes of the Chinese Communist Party, like those billionaires that got disappeared, right, overnight. What are you going to do? There is no recourse. So a philosophical question can turn into a practical question very quickly if you live in an authoritarian regime. I'm an immigrant. I really did give up everything. I tried my best to stay out of China and to move to another country. Now, I'm not saying this is the best choice for everybody who lives in China, but the people who don't get a chance to get out are the people who deserve the chance the most. It's not the people who have various apartments in these big cities in China. It's not the people that would interact with you in English because they were fortunate enough to afford a decent education in China comparatively. It's the people who you will never be able to see. Even if you see them, they won't be able to talk to you. Even if they talk to you, they will get reprimanded, censored, or taken away. Those are the people who would risk their lives for a better life elsewhere because it truly is better elsewhere.